and I think people are ready for it. What do you say, chat? Are you ready for some audiobook chill vibes? It's like the first serious voicey thing. So it sounds a bit unusual, because usually when I do voice work, it's very loose and like spontaneous and not serious. So this is one of the first few really scripted things I've done. So the tone of voice is a little bit different, but let's get into it, baby. Let's see now. I'm going to move my microphone away from me so it doesn't capture too much audio, because otherwise it's going to mess up the subtitles. Are you ready?
History and Hope. Thorgan Fredrickson, eldest son of House Frederick, stood in front of the largest of the 5 fireplaces in the Great Hall. He wanted to remain motionless as a stone statue, but he absent-mindedly fidgeted with one of the edges of his crimson-trimmed black robes. There were obvious signs of worry etched on his otherwise middle-aged face. Thorgan was a champion paladin, which belied his average height and lean appearance. Moreover, Thorgan was a lawbringer and a member of the much-feared Inquisition sect. He served Cathar, the Holy Father, as a member of the Order. The measure of his accomplishments, more than 100 banners of various ranks, was something young Paladin looked up to. His commanding presence and extensive knowledge of the law was respected by most members of the Order. In any other circumstance, people treaded lightly in his presence. Except for the moment.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to pause real quick. What the frickin' Welcome, Dippy Whippy. How are you doing? Oh my god. Well, I suppose we just got 1 minute into the audiobook, so I guess we can restart it, I guess, for anyone who's new. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. I am just testing out captions. They are an absolute mess, but they're fun, so we're sticking with it. Thank you so much, Dippy Whippy. What the frick frack? Welcome in. If you haven't checked out Dippy Whippy yet, go dip yourself over in the Whippy. Over in the... You should give them a follow. How are you doing? I hope you're doing absolutely amazing today. Welcome to my corner of the internet. I'm usually on YouTube. I stream sometimes, and I have recently finalized an audiobook that I was asked to record called The Blind Servant. And today we are going to listen to the first couple of chapters on stream to like have a nice cozy vibe together. And yeah, I do hope you enjoy it. We were just starting to listen to it, so perfect timing. Perfect timing. And let's get into it, shall we? Thank you everyone who joined, and thank you Dippy Whippy. Let's get into this beautiful, beautiful beast. Wow. First stream in ever I don't actually need a mic for.
History and Hope. Thorgan Fredrickson, eldest son of House Frederick, stood in front of the largest of the 5 fireplaces in the Great Hall. He wanted to remain motionless as a stone statue, but he absent-mindedly fidgeted with one of the edges of his crimson-trimmed black robes. There were obvious signs of worry etched on his otherwise middle-aged face. Thorgan was a champion paladin, which belied his average height and lean appearance. Moreover, Thorgan was a lawbringer and a member of the much-feared Inquisition sect. He served Cathar, the Holy Father, as a member of the Order. The measure of his accomplishments, more than 100 banners of various ranks, was something young Paladin looked up to. His commanding presence and extensive knowledge of the law was respected by most members of the Order. In any other circumstance, people treaded lightly in his presence. Except for the moment. Thorgan was alone. He waited for his wife. Though it had made many on either side of the magical divide nervous, Thorgan had married his true love. Blessed by the goddess Shivaya, Thorgan wed the elemental Abyssina Rose, Grand Matriarch of House Sharon. Being married to Lady Rose, Lord Fredrickson had the right to walk the streets of the elemental city Vicha. Similarly, Lady Rose had the right to walk the streets of the holy city Arx, sometimes referred to as the Citadel. However, given the current stresses between the two cities and the unease the marriage caused for many, Lord Fredrickson and Lady Rose usually met in the Great Hall of Elementals and Paladins, though the name was usually shortened outside of official notes to Great Hall. A slight rustling nose caught Thorgun's attention. For a moment he became truly motionless. He didn't move from the fireplace, neither did he turn to face the coming visitor. He suspected he already knew who it was. To test his theory, Thorgun spoke softly about nothing important. Vicha, Thorgun mumbled, without turning around. It's amazing how many people call it the White City over the translated name of White Sea. We've gotten tired of correcting people, a calm voice intoned as a response. Wife, Thorgun said, allowing him to relax a bit. Husband, Abyssina replied. The fireplace, heretofore quiet and barely burning, exploded to life. Momentarily, the roar filled the whole of the hall. The entire expanse of stonework comprising the firebox erupted with flames. Then the whole thing settled to a normal-sized burning fire, though the flames seemed to warm the whole of the hall rather than just the area around the fireplace. Thorgun watched the dancing, flickering flames. He was lost in thought. It was only when he noticed the flames had started turning from bright reds and oranges to dark blues, almost black, he realized his wife had walked up next to him. Rather than sitting in her house's seats some way away, Lady Rose came to a stop. She kissed Thorgun on the cheek, then walked over to a chair that belonged to the elemental house Revered. It was only once she settled that Thorgun spoke again. "You're troubled," Thorgun said. He returned his view to the abyssal blue-colored flames burning in the fireplace. Though the flames burned such a color, they still provided warmth against the winter's edge settling over the lands. "Are you not?" Lady Rose asked in reply. "I suppose I am," Thorgun admitted. "The question is, are we worried about the same thing?" "A war is coming, husband." "Yes, the rule banners are burning. The paladins and elementals are at odds again. These wars usually don't cause too many problems, though. We'll bicker, we'll argue, people will be charged with trespassing. It will blow over, as they always do." "Not this war," Lady Rose corrected. "A blood war." Thorgun stiffened at the thought. He let his mind drift into the history of the lands. It was a long and sordid history. There were 300 days in the calendar year. Out of all of them, 5 were celebrated as major holy days. Each holy day was named for its corresponding member of House Ishtara. Ishta for Ishtara, Kathta for Cathar, Ishkada for Ishtara Katarina, Ishserda for Ishtara Serafina, Ishshida for Ishtara Shivaya. Ishta was always the first day of the new year. It was a celebration for the Holy Mother Ishtara. It was the largest feast of the year. Ishta was the one day every store was closed. It was the one day where there was no work done by anyone. It was the one day that no one did anything that might be looked down upon by the Holy Mother. Even the worst of the worst criminals took the day off, lest Ishtara visit them personally and judge them. Kathta, the celebration for the Holy Father Cathar, was also referred to as first turning, when the red sun, Saneana, rose before the blue sun. Varying between 59 and 61 days into the year, Kathta was the traditional time of first planting, when the fields had been turned for the coming year's crop. Though there was a great feast in each household come the evening, work was done during the day to ensure everything could be blessed for the coming year. Stores sold their goods at reduced costs, ensuring even the poorest person would be able to eat. Inns and taverns opened their doors to everyone, regardless of ability to pay. Kathta was truly a celebration for the masses. Ishkada was the celebration of the birth of the first daughter of Ishtara and Cathar. It was the summer solace and the perfect time to celebrate the goddess Ishtara Katarina. The solace was the day the red sun reached its highest point in the daytime sky and represented the longest daylight of the year. Once every 300 years, Ishkada would fall on either the 119th or 121st day of the year. The other 299 years, it always fell on the 120th day of the year. Of the 5 holidays, Ishkada was the second most stable, behind only Ishta. The birth of the second daughter of Ishtara and Cathar was celebrated on Ish-Serda, commonly referred to as the second turning. Ish-Serda was the day the blue sun, Sanepare, rose first and represented a turn from summer towards winter. Though it did not represent death or the thinning of the veil between the worlds, the people feasted in honor of Ishtara Serafina, the goddess of death. Ish-Serda varied between the 179th and 181st day of the year. When the blue sun reached its highest point in the sky, usually between 238 and 242 days into the calendar year, the people celebrated Ish-Shida. It was the winter solace and a celebration for the youngest daughter of Ishtara and Cathar, Ishtara Shivaya, goddess of change. It was also the time when the barrier between the living world and the spirit world was the thinnest, enticing followers of Serafina to try to communicate with their lost family members and loves. Both Serafina and Shivaya were annoyed by those who sought to bridge the gap between the worlds on such a holy day. Once the 300th day fell into night, the calendar would start again. The people and a land known as Kreshon lived and died by the calendar. None more so than the 2 groups of magic users that watched over the land and the people when they weren't bickering at each other or finding anything better to do. The people of Kreshon had always known of the 2 types of magic users, which they usually held in the highest regards. There were those that followed Cathar and used the light as both their armor and weapon. They were known as Paladin if male, and Valkyrie if female, and represented the 5th Order. The 5th Order, sometimes referred to simply as the Order, was the last of 5 great orders that protected the lands throughout history. Those that carried the Holy Spark, described as having courage of conviction, were trained, tested, and bound to the service of the Holy Father and the Order. Divided into houses by their preferred element, the Paladin houses were a mash of people, usually unrelated, though it was not uncommon to have a son or daughter of someone with a holy spark that would also have a holy spark. Intermixed were 1 or 2 family houses, but those were relict from an age past. The only exception to this melting pot of cultures were the true holy orders, such as the Order of the Elven Tides. These specialized groups were made up entirely of one sort. In the case of even tides, every member was a seasoned sailor as well as a paladin or Valkyrie. The other magic users followed the 3 daughters, Katarina, Serafina, and Shivaya. They carried something described as the spark of life. It was different than courage of conviction in that it gave the bearer the ability to use an elemental form of magic rather than holy magic. Called mages, elementals, or disparagingly, wizards, those with the spark of life fell into lineages rather than houses. It had long been recorded that the spark of life followed families. Like the paladins, the elementals had a few houses that were different, in the case of non-lineage-based individuals, to accommodate people from the outside who developed the spark of life, but were not related to any of the known families. Over time, if the lineage held, a family could develop, just as much as one could fall if no children were conceived, or if the children failed to show the spark of life. Though uncommon, there were 4 aberrations that occurred within magic families. The first anomaly was identified as switch. In that case, someone born to an elemental family or holy house would present as having the other form of magic, either an elemental child showing courage of conviction, or a holy child showing the spark of life. Though, to be a mistake, those bearing the marker of switch were often looked down upon, though never truly shunned by family or house. The second deviation was specific to the elemental families. Sometimes, though a child showed a spark of life, the element they were proficient in would not be the same as their families. They called this event change. In such an instance, the Council of Elementals would convene and work with whom the child should train, test, and learn from so they would become aligned to their elemental power. In such an instance, there were rules in place to prevent that child from sharing the rites and rituals of the harboring family. More often than not, the child was not shunned or thought less of by anyone. However, during certain ceremonies and celebrations, the child could not live with their family. The third divergence was called undoing. In this event, a child born to an elemental or Valkyrie never showed a spark of magic. They were not blessed with the gift of their families or houses. Such births were disappointing to the households involved, but rarely ended with anyone being shunned or evicted. Instead, the child was considered normal and treated as a member of the family. The only downside to having been undone was that the child would likely die before the parents. In terms of lifespan, elementals and paladins were different than most people. It wasn't uncommon for them to live at least 1,200 years, with some seeing over 1,500 before they passed into Serfina's domain. Children without the spark would live normal 70 to 90-year lives and pass on. It was heartbreaking for most families to watch their child grow old and die, even as they themselves didn't age all that much. There was, however, one more category that drew the sharpest rebuke for anyone unlucky enough to fit into it. The last category belonged to those who shared from both the spark of life and courage of conviction. These people were hybrids, able to wield both elemental and holy magic. They were considered true abominations. They were considered walking nightmares. They were usually shunned by their families, in part because they held abilities their families couldn't, and in part because of a known curse that afflicted some hybrids. "This world doesn't need another blood war," Thorgan mumbled. "The world never needed any war," Lady Rose responded. "Such are the ways of interpersonal interactions. However, that wars happen. I doubt the war between the demons and the paladin has to do with interpersonal interactions." Lady Rose snickered. "I yield," she offered. "Some wars are beyond the words and actions of mortals." "There have been ages where paladin and elementals have gotten along," Thorgan offered, referencing to the current burning banners. "3 ages worth at least," Lady Rose offered in return. "Interrupted by the wars between the kingdoms," Thorgan retorted. "I wonder how much of our differences are because of the sides houses choose during those wars," Lady Rose pondered. "You would think such wounds would have healed after the First Blood War." "Not all of us can be children of grace," Lady Rose added. The 2 great cities, Vicha and the Citadel, had been built, refined, and rebuilt over hundreds of years. The Holy City, once known as Sanctus Pacifiae, the peaceful sanctuary, coalesced the 5 great orders into one meeting place. As time and wars wore on and the orders shrank, Sanctus Pacifiae became the last of the great paladin fortresses. It was renamed Arx, then the Citadel. Like the holy cities, the elemental cities were built to house all of the great families, and one stretched to the length and width of the 5 great castles, including their farmlands. As time and war took their toll, the elemental city shrank and coalesced. Though it now stood as a shadow of its former glory, the last of the great elemental cities kept the name Vicha, the White Sea, referencing the white blocks of marble that made up its walls. It was a rare event that a child born to an elemental or Valkyrie would be born on one of the holy days. It was even more rare a child should be born on the holy day that corresponded to the house's patron goddess. However, that is exactly what happened one summer solace morning. No one could foresee the breadth and depth of horror the birth would have. The child, their original name and house long damned from the memory of the world, was the first true hybrid. The peace the world enjoyed shattered with the rise of the first Akan. everyone came to know and fear the name Akan An, first of the revived bloodrenders, first of the cursed true blood knights, first of the mad hybrids. Akon An rose from his house and family into the madness he became known for. He carried with him the power of paladin and elemental, a feat long theorized but never realized until his birth. Under the wrath of Akon An, the land bled from ocean to ocean. Corruption spread like a disease, infecting every kingdom, every seat of power, and every soul it could reach. The people suffered with the land, famine ran rampant, disease grew, even in the bastion of the citadel in Vicha. There seemed to be nothing that could stop the shadows and flames that covered Kreshan. With a request from the combined elemental and paladin council, the goddess Ishtara joined the two great cities, merging the citadel and Vicha. In a final, desperate attempt to stop Akon An and his armies, the 5 holy orders, along with all the elemental families, mounted a defense at the greatest fortress ever created. Overlooking the plains of Jamin, with what was left of the armies from the surrounding kingdoms, the two sides met. In the battle, among the blood and the darkness of spreading terror, the goddess Ishtara broke the rules that governed interactions between immortals and magic users and intervened. She granted unto 10 houses, 5 elemental and 5 paladin, a great gift of strength and power. Gift in hand, the 10 houses rallied the combined armies. In one final push, Akon An was brought to his end. The surge of power was so great it echoed through the very fabric of Kreshan. Though the evil had fallen, the land took generations to recover, and Jamin was seemingly forever cursed as a place where crops would not grow, animals would not wander, and people would not live. From the ashes of battle, a punishment was handed down to Ishtara by a group known fearfully as the Council of Praetors. Ishtara had broken the rules to preserve the land, and for that infraction, the blood curse was solidified. Part of the punishment seemed to be the rise of hybrids as a more common occurrence. The other part of the punishment was the creation of an amulet consisting of 8 blood shards. Any hybrid that came into contact with the blood shards, or the amulet into which they fit, would be granted the gifts of the Akan and become the next true blood knight. The gift, however, came with the madness of Akon An, and anyone assuming the blood knight's banner would have to reconcile the nightmare internally. In every instance, the blood knight lost and descended into madness, bringing havoc with them. Finally, after the punishments had been handed out, the great defensive fortress was once more divided into the citadel and Vicha. A third city was constructed equidistant between Vicha and Arx, though it was smaller than either of the two. There, in a place named simply the Great Hall, the elementals and paladins met for a council, for celebrations, and for various other meetings, big or small. There was a space in the main room to hold every elemental and paladin, divided into their houses. For meetings with the goddess or the Holy Father, Ishtara was all but banned from dealing with the elementals and paladins, though certain exceptions were made. Instead, she just looked on, forever bound as a neutral player in the world as it turned on. The Great Hall overlooked the plains of Jamin, just west of a small rise referred to as the Turkey Hill, even though the official maps called it the Gobble's Knob. That rise was all that remained of the great fortress. Over time, scrub grasses and shrubs grew to cover what had once been the battlefield. Time marched forward, and things settled down. In the 15,000 plus years since the battle with Akon An, 5 other Akon rose and fell. Their names and deeds were recorded in books called blood omens. Those books, along with other banned books, were stored in a library watched over by the Holy Father and his 3 daughters. The information within was kept mostly safe from prying eyes. the world moved on. In the year of the Holy Mother, 15,499 after the rise of the great houses, barely 10 generations from the fall of Acon on, a daughter was born to House Isogbrun, one of the winter houses under patronage from the goddess Shivaya. The daughter's birth on the winter solace was seen as a great blessing. The youngest daughter of House Isogbrun was true winter-born. The following year, 15,500, something happened that had never been recorded throughout the whole of the short history since Acon On's rise. The first daughter of Sharan, Abyssina Rose, gave birth to a son on the winter solace. He was also true winter-born. It was the first time 2 true-born children had been birthed in successive years. Prior to this event, the closest 2 had ever been born was 25 years apart. Many of the elementals and paladins thought this event, the birth of 2 true winter-born, to be an unsettling omen. This was especially true because they knew the second child was born of a union between an elemental and a paladin, not sanctioned by either of the councils. "Lost, are we?" Lady Rose asked, interrupting Thorgin's thoughts. "I was thinking of some history," Thorgin admitted. The day Abyssina Rose of House Sharan and Thorgin Fredrickson of House Frederick were married, with only the blessing of the goddess Shivaya. That blessing alone saved Alametheus from being executed as an abomination the moment he was born. "Time moves forward," Lady Rose offered. "As to your previous point, I can feel the war coming too," Thorgin offered. "Lord Atuli has been missing far too long. There was no mention of a supply run, a mission for an immortal, or even the thinnest whisper of where he went." There was a pause in the conversation. "I am also worried for our son," Lady Rose said after a few moments. "He will be fine," Thorgin said. He was trying to add a bit of comfort to his wife's troubles, as much as he was saying it for himself. "Arrangements have been made," Thorgin added. "To which house will he be assigned?" "Red Hills," Thorgin offered. "Not House Frederick?" Abyssina asked, somewhat surprised. "No. In an effort to ease the fears of your sister and the other elemental houses, and those of my brother, I have decided that he will not be Inquisition." Abyssina said nothing, choosing to mill over the information quietly. "My brother will take care of him should anything happen to us," Thorgin added. There was more silence from Abyssina. Finally, she spoke. "You know he hates me?" Lady Rose asked. "He hates our son too. He has already called him a filthy hybrid, even though he hasn't shown any magical abilities. He could be undone, for all we know." Thorgin said nothing. "I've heard rumors. According to him, I am the dirty whore of Sharan. It is a title that does not sit well with my sister. Nor does my brother like my new title of the Bastard of Frederick. But George is lawbringer like me. Atuli, the last true hybrid, was an elemental, and therefore, if our son shows both gifts, he must be paladin. That, however, is unknown. The timing is right for another hybrid, based on what evidence the seers call upon. But our son hasn't shown any ability. That is unnatural for one of his age. You are wrong. Alametheus is too young. Ability doesn't show up until he turns 5 at the youngest. Also, you and I both know that doesn't mean George will take proper care of our son. Our child is a son of Frederick," Thorgin half scolded. "My brother wouldn't dare hurt him. The goddess Seraphina would have him executed for such a crime, especially because George is Inquisition." "Alametheus is also a son of Sharan," Lady Rose scolded back. "Yes, and your sister has about as much ice in her veins over our son as my brother has anger in his blood. Would our son fare any better under your banner?" There were a few more moments of silence. The fire flickered and sparked. Occasionally an orange flame would slip through the otherwise blue fire. "I love you, son of Frederick. I am sorry it has come to pass as it has." "I love you too, daughter of Sharan." I would not worry about how things have come to pass. I am over 800 years old. You are over 750 years old. We have seen war before. If history is any guide, we will see at least one more war after this. Though I hope this coming war is one between cities and not another blood war. Alametheus will grow up, train, and live as we have. He will be a beacon of light that represents both House Frederick and House Sharon, despite the vitriol they have for the both of us and him. The fire lightened a bit in color, turning more of a bright blue rather than the abyssal blue it had been. Though she had felt some trepidation, Abyssina relaxed her worries with the voice of reason her husband offered. We could have asked the councils for permission to have a child, Abyssina offered. Then maybe the houses wouldn't be so strongly at odds with everything. House Sharon and House Frederick agreeing to anything would have been an effort worthy of the Holy Father, the Holy Mother, and the 3 daughters. Add in the fact that I walk with the Inquisition, and there would be better odds that the demon General Huang would seek forgiveness for what he has done. Abyssina laughed. She rose from her chair and walked over to Thorgan. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed his cheek. Thorgan smiled as he felt the warmth of his wife's body. Alametheus should have a sibling someday, Abyssina offered. Just one? Thorgan asked. The fire changed from blue to orange. The increased light cast the shadows of the lovers on the far wall of the great hall. The pair stood in front of the fireplace for a while longer, leaving only when a servant came in to tell them that Alametheus had woken up from his slumber and was lightly crying for something to eat. History and hope.
So apparently Alametheus got renamed to Lemethau. But that's okay. So subtitles are so-so, but that's chapter 1. That's the intro chapter. It's going pretty well so far, I think. The subtitles are a little bit wonky, but in my opinion, they're better than nothing. It's not too bad. I've seen worse. So, is it a caption AI? It's not that complex. I think it's just, what is it, Google speech to text or something like that. So it's not super fancy or anything. It's one of the standard ones. When you read this, I imagine you in a dark room narrating your studies while writing with a quill. Now all you need is candles and herb burning in the background. So, as an avid audiobook listener, this is well done. Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for all the subs and stuff that came in while the book was running. I was trying to thank you all in chat. Hopefully that was seen. It's tricky to talk while doing an audiobook showing at the same time. So I try to interact with chat directly instead. I hope that's okay. Do you want to listen to chapter 2 right away? Do you want to take a break or should we just keep going? We can listen for a little bit. I don't have any rush today. I'm glad you guys liked it. That's super nice. Okay, we got the second chapter too. Yeah, sure. It's the second one is almost half an hour long, so that would be kind of perfect length, I think. 2 first chapters for this stream. I think that's a really good like first showcase. And if you're interested in this book, you can find the links to both the original copy and also the audiobook in the chat. Can you tell us if Lemethau survives? Goddamn caption. All right, let's go.
The path to exile. Tong found himself listening to a light set of footsteps creeping up behind him. He turned from his position, looking out across an open expanse to face the coming visitor. Though he had been blinded, years of training and practice had given Tong the ability to extend his other senses to cover what he had been missing without sight. However, in this instance, Tong had missed the arrival of the man that walked up to him. He had missed the feeling and residue of the magic bringing the visitor to his side. Tong felt put off by the incident. In all of his years wandering the world, north to south, east to west, there had only been one individual with the ability to sneak up on him unknown. In all my years, you've been the only person I could not feel coming. Tong said, with some annoyance in his voice. I would not have expected to have you join me, Tong added quietly, recognizing the pattern of the footsteps and their weight. He could also feel something of a void surrounding the person walking up to him. It's always good to see you, Master Top, the visitor answered. Come to gather me for some fancy feast, perhaps a dance in the great hall. My mother seeks your presence, the visitor offered. Tong let out an audible sigh. Before you complain and condemn me to the bowels of punishment, yes, I come to you as an official messenger. Tong turned silently back towards his original focus. He stood at the edge of the tundra in the farthest reaches of the north and west of Kreshan. He faced the mostly barren, ice-covered lands with their endless, whipping winds. For a brief instant, the wind seemed to pick up, as if Shivaya was angry at something. Master Top, Tong uttered. That is the name you have usually used when we've met, is it not? The visitor asked. Tong smiled and chuckled. Top, Tong, Tafa, Toof. I've used so many variations of this name, I have long lost count of when and where. Will you come? Tong considered the request. He let his mind drift to a new thought as he faced the wind-whipped plains beyond the hearty ever-pine taiga that grew as a tight-knit wall against the arctic winds of an unforgiving wasteland. Tell me, messenger, Tong started. The endless walk, the place reserved for souls who failed to achieve paradise, but were never bad enough for penitence. Is it really an endless, white-lit plain with perfectly flat terrain, an empty expanse, and a place where one rarely runs into another soul condemned to the same fate? The visitor eyed Tong for a moment. It is, the messenger finally answered. Oblivion, Tong muttered. No, the messenger replied. A place to gather your thoughts, a place to recall your life, a place to answer the questions regarding how you should have lived life. That would be worse than penitence for me, left alone with my thoughts, a nightmare. There was a pause in the conversation. Tong considered this fate as he stood where the last vestiges of civilization ended. He stood at the edge of normal life. He stood where the ever-pine trees grew so close together they acted as a natural wall against the deep, freezing Arctic winds of the unforgiving wasteland called the tundra. Tong continued to think of the endless walk, though he believed himself to have earned the right to walk with his brethren on Eagle's Ridge, or even the Gleaming Tower, both pieces of paradise. He knew his exile would only grant him the endless walk. Your mother and I have long ago stopped being civil to each other, Tong mumbled as he continued to let his mind drift. What sort of living nightmare would require her to summon me to her circle? Beyond the wall of wood, there were a few scrubby-looking plant carcasses. They had long withered under the relentless wind and fathomless cold. Beyond the frozen scrub, there were drifting dunes made entirely of hard-packed ice crystals torn from the moorings. They were eroded from the ground by other crystals which had succumbed to the same fate some time before. Tong, for everything he had suffered, knew better than to step out from the wind-blocking protection of the ever-pines. He had done so once before. He had made sure it was summer, when the winds were the lightest they'd be, and the temperature was the warmest it would get. Though he was largely immune to the Arctic chill, the ice crystals abraded his skin just as sand caught in the storms of the great western wasteland would an unsuspecting traveler. Unlike the wasteland sandstorms, however, the winds in the tundra never stopped blowing to give the crystals a rest. There were rumors of some places where the wind blew so much and in so many different directions, star-shaped dunes of ice crystals had formed. Tong hadn't seen them in his travels and had no inclination to find out if the rumors were true. She would very much appreciate your tutoring, Evelyn. Top smiled. The youngest daughter of House Shadow? She groped me once. The messenger laughed lightly. Many of us find that amusing. I should make it a part of my tutelage to return the favor. I promised she wouldn't argue. She likes you. Tong sighed. He had stood where he many times before, dressed much as he was now. His feet were clad in thick cloth wrappings, bound by well-worn brown leather straps. His legs were covered by fur-lined, once white, linen pants, held fast at the ankles by similarly worn leather straps, and at the waist by an old, frayed, three-cord rope belt. The same belt bound by a small brown pouch to Tong's side, in which was everything Tong owned. Tucked in at the pants and covering his torso was a fur-lined, once dark blue linen shirt with sleeves that stopped at the point just above the crook of the elbow. Tong's arms were wrapped from shoulder to palm of hand in thick, once white linen bandages. The bandages allowed him to move freely, but still held some protection against the intense cold. Though exposed, Tong's fingers did not seem to be affected by the chilled air. Lastly, Tong wore a low-angled conical hat that threatened to block his sight. He would have considered this more of an issue than it was, but Tong's eyes were covered by a dark blue, almost black linen bandage that wrapped from the bridge of his nose around either side of his head to the back around his nose again, and once more to the back, where it was tied in a knot with the tailing ends tucked into the other bandages. In contrast, the visitor's robes, neither thick nor lined, were the purest of black in color and seemed to absorb the very light that surrounded him. His aura seemed void of any energy, which helped tip Tong as to who approached when the messenger came walking up. The man wore not hat, likely he wore no shoes either. Such were dressed the messengers of Seraphina. You still get stopped by people wanting blessings? The messenger asked, changing the subject for a moment. Tong thought about how often he was mistaken for a traveling brother of the Ebon Monastery when he was dressed as he was. In fact, Tong had once been an Ebon monk, but as the Ebon Monastery had fallen, he no longer considered himself one of the great masters. Normally, the monks of the Ebon Monastery were dressed in a similar outfit that was all black, but changed into a version Tong's current image to help hide who they were, as they moved from place to place in the world at large. They were tired of being stopped for blessings, as well since it was a monkey's duty to help people, but keep it out of sight. Despite their efforts and clothing changes, the world had noticed. The monks had no desire to change their outfits a second time. The primary difference between Tong and the other monks had been the bandage wrapped around his eyes. However, Tong reminded himself that the Brotherhood of Ebon monks was gone, and those monks who survived its fall were taken into the order, except for Tong. More often than I care to admit, Tong answered. He went back to a previous portion of the conversation. Dead lighter, witch doctor, or both. The way of the dead lighter first, witch doctor second. Why not N? She's the most powerful witch doctor, second only to the queen. Grandmother has seen fit to heed your request. N was recognized as a daughter of House Ishtara. She is now bound by the rules of the immortals. Those rules do not stop her from teaching the ways of the witch doctor. The messenger did not respond to the statement. Tong noticed instantly. He became very suspicious as a few thoughts filtered through his mind. I will not make her a true witch doctor, Tong said, his voice filled with a sudden gravity. You were always quick to catch on, the messenger answered. Sometimes not fast enough, Tong continued. Listen carefully, Aethargo, second-born of Serfina's twins, and heed my words, for they carry death for any who choose not to listen. You were once my friend. You are always my brother. You are truly a distant cousin. There is only one way to grant someone true witch doctor status, and I will be damned to the library before I'll let such an event take place. You carry a gift you were never meant to have, Iathargo explained. Tong cut him off. I never sought this gift. Anne gave it to me with a lie. Even then, even with my anger at such a thing, I promised to help her. And I did. Yes, Iathargo agreed. Iatharia still wants you to be punished. She cites the rule, no man should ever be a witch doctor. Tong turned to face Iathargo. Iathargo could see a faint green light start to filter from the bandages covering Tong's eyes. He shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. Tong's voice changed accents. As he started to speak, Iathargo could hear the intonations of the people of the Blackmire Swamp. He knew he was now in the presence of the witch doctor Tofu. Do you know why they do not let the men become witch doctors? Tong asked. Iathargo shifted, still uncomfortable. Why? He asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. To be a witch doctor, you need many things. You need the love of the spirits. They do not give such a thing easily. You also need to carry the balance. For a witch doctor to carry the balance, they need to have a life within to balance death without. Men cannot carry life, and you need to have blood as cold as ice. Life and death in cycle. No extensions, no favors, no undead. Iathargo nodded. He knew what Tofu was getting at. The spirits don't like me, Tofu continued. They only tolerated me because of N. Now they do not speak to me, even if my cause in question is just. I do not hold life within, though I could grant life to others. They would need to be near me at all times. Even as an Ebon monk, I would not keep a shrine maiden with me, as I am not as cold as I seem. I know that, Iathargo uttered. I should never have been a witch doctor. I did your sister a favor by keeping N from the abyss. I have suffered enough. My punishment is living as a witch doctor, which goes against the very fabric of my life. I was a paladin once. I was trained to stop the darkness, not become a part of it. Which is why my mother hasn't punished you, despite Iatharia's demands. Evelyn will not be a true witch doctor by me, Tofu added angrily. Mother and Itharia will make the case you are the most powerful of the people available for it. I do not care, Tofu said. N was granted life within by a hybrid. She turned out to be the most powerful witch doctor ever known. N was born from the immortal bloodline. Evelyn was not. I was not. There is no justification for such a request or union. There was a long pause in the conversation. Tofu turned back to face the wastes of the tundra. Iathargo rocked a bit on his feet, unaffected by the cold air and howling winds. They ask too much of me, Tong said, his accent gone. Tong gritted his teeth as a particularly cold burst of wind came racing through the everpines. He felt the coming depth of winter on the wind and knew it was going to be brutal. The goddess Shivaya always made winter worse when she was angry at someone for something. Tong's mind drifted as he stood facing the endless waste of the tundra. He was to be 200 and some years old come the next day of winter's breath, also called Ishshida. It would be the first day of 3 to celebrate the birth of Shivaya, third daughter of Ishtara and Cathar. Shivaya was the goddess of winter. More specifically, she was the goddess of seasonal change. But since she was known to favor the chill of winter and the frost houses, everyone just referred to her as the goddess of winter. The second day of the celebration was usually the winter solace, the point at which the blue sun reached its highest peak. This signaled the deepest colds were coming in short order. The third day, the day of Shivaya's birth, was a feast day. The elementals and paladins would gather in the great hall. Their servants and cooks would prepare the meal, starting from before the sun's rise, and serve it when the first sun was halfway between zenith and setting. If the goddess felt like it, she would make an appearance. Her symbol, a large light blue glowing snowflake, would appear in front of the grand fireplace, the largest of 5 that graced the great hall. Just before her arrival, the fire would flare and start burning with a myriad of dark and light blue flames. Tong smiled at the thought of the great feast. For 20 years, he prepared and served the meal as one of the servants of first House Whitehall, then House Isogbrunn. Like so many of the other 190-plus years, however, Tong did not believe he would be in the Great Hall for the feast. He was not welcome there, and, if discovered, would generate a great amount of discontent. The idea of the chaos his presence would bring made Tong smile a bit more wryly. "How did it come to this?" Tong asked, after his smile faded. "How did what come to what?" Iathargo asked. "I'm banned from Katarina's city Ankar, your mother's sepulchre, and Shivaya's winter palace. They've damned me from Arx and Vicha. I am forbidden on the Wild Isle, even though I have completed the ritual. I am barred from the Isle of Towers. I am hated by so many, loved by so few, and allied by none. I didn't choose my path. I didn't ask for most of my skills and gifts. All I did was try to live a life in exile. Should I go down the list of banners? Perhaps it's because you're a crippled, disowned exile. What about Oskelgedden, Slefja, Vitzketer, Blot, Helfttroll, Mela, Quilfas, Skreya, Tick, son of bastard, son of whore?" Iathargo paused as Tong turned to cut him what would have been a sideways glance had he been able to see. "Did I miss any?" "Quaint," Tong replied. Iathargo laughed. "Come, distant cousin, I left off the worst of the offenses. You have told me you would help my mother if she ever asked. You've even offered to let her bind some of these skills once they have been passed on. My mother, for all her eccentricities, is asking you to let her bind your dead lighter and witch doctor abilities after you've taught Evelyn. I am sure she will lift the sepulchre ban once that is done. Does she still want the 3 pieces of the true death shroud back?" 2. And yes, when my sister convinced grandmother to move your house so the elementals and paladins could pick it clean, mother took back the one that hid it from everyone's sight. Iatharia, Tong uttered, a clear distaste for the name in his voice. "My sister was wrong to do what she did," Iathargo admitted. "She hates you for keeping N from her, even though you have long proven you did it only because N deserved a better fate than the one Iatharia had waiting for her. Your mother should have intervened on N's behalf, especially if she wanted me to surrender the Witch Doctor banner. As for your sister, I am well aware the only reason you don't ask grandmother to punish her for violating the law of sanctuary is because she and I are bound together. Though I cannot speak for her, I promise I do not take your gift lightly. Your kindness and understanding were a major reason I returned to my station as a messenger when you asked it of me." "I want to hate her," Tong admitted. 199 years of work and adventuring. Taken. Maybe more years than that. I don't track the years well anymore. A product of the blindness? A product of me not caring?" There was a pause. Tong continued. "All of my books, taken. My artifacts, my monies, even my ability to brew potions and tonics, stripped to the bone as vultures do a corpse. The only consolation I can offer is the hundreds helped by the information, supplies, materials, and potions gathered from your house." "Hundreds? I have helped thousands," Tong chastised. "You've killed thousands," Iathargo countered. "Yes, I've killed thousands too, but I wasn't given much of a choice most times. Besides, the least the councils could have done was to let me keep the abyssal blue to help reconcile the nightmares. Perhaps Lady Leviathan would have." Iathargo started. He continued after a small pause, "If you hadn't gotten drunk and vomited into the abyssal clam." Tong flashed back to the night he, Iathargo, and Araminta youngest daughter of House Isokbran, got drunk on Abyssal Blue. The trio decided, with drunken reasoning, to visit the abyss where the goddess Leviathan lurked. While there, Tong had gotten sick into an open abyssal clamshell, not realizing the creature was still alive. Leviathan was not happy with the resulting pearl the clam coughed up days later. Dan thought it was hilarious, Tong offered. Iathargo shrugged his shoulders and nodded. "Will you come?" Iathargo asked, after a moment of silence. "Have I ever failed to answer the sisters' call?" "No," Iathargo said. "However, you haven't always been the kindest soul when they have needed you." "Did it have to be like this, Iathargo?" Tong asked, his mind flashing over to how this particular path started. "What have I done to deserve to be treated this way? Not worth the food I eat, not worth the water I drink, not worth the air I breathe, not even worth the dirt they will throw on my grave. Assuming they don't incinerate my body and sweep the ashes into the fireplace." "The path of the paladin wasn't meant for you," Iathargo offered. "You should have been an elemental, even if the law said otherwise. Yet I have walked as a paladin in the shadow, better than others have walked it in the light." "Yes, but much of the good you have accomplished would not have been possible if you had been bound by the rules of the Brotherhood." "The Brotherhood? They are the ones that damned me. They hated me from the moment I was born, for no other reason than I was a possible hybrid. Even then, it was more because they didn't like my mother and father being in love, or having children. The Brotherhood," Tong growled. There was another pause. "Do you remember the day I was exiled?" Tong asked. "I do. It was the very same day my mother told me to watch over you while you dealt with being in exile," Iathargo admitted. "She never expected a path it would take you on. Otherwise, the sisters would have long ago intervened." "They still can. So could the Holy Father, even though he has forsaken me. Even the Holy Mother could help me now," Tong added. "Even though I am not really theirs to save. You were not forsaken, and I've told you 1,000 times. You have to ask," Iathargo started quietly. "They cannot help you if you won't let them." Tong took a deep breath. He could feel the Arctic cold sear at his lungs. The tears that threatened to fall from his eyes because of the memories filtering through his mind were first absorbed by the bandages, then frozen so quickly they sublimated before they could grow in sufficient quantity to fall. "Serafina never expected your path to alter because of me," Tong said. "No, she didn't," Iathargo agreed. "Nor did Shivaya think your life would affect her daughter so much. Nor did Katarina believe you'd affect her daughter so much. It's been a learning experience for everyone. I wouldn't be surprised if things have changed with my grandparents, even if they keep a veneer up to shroud anyone noticing." "One trip," Tong said. "One trip doomed me. Shivaya was supposed to have told Master Morgan to take you on board the Pelendor. Her messenger didn't make it in time. Instead, he called me a liar, which was half true, and walked away, chiding me. And that was the day we lost track of you," Iathargo added. Tong's mind drifted as the wind started howling across the tundra again. "It wasn't supposed to have been this way. I didn't deserve this. I just wanted to be like them." Tong turned his head again. He looked over to Iathargo. Iathargo could see small frozen flakes breaking off and falling from the bandages covering Tong's eyes. A family, a house, to be wanted, to be normal. Was that too much to ask? Tong said, the tears starting to affect his voice. A single pair of snowflakes fell from the corner of Iathargo's right eye. He had no answer to give the man standing in front of him. He desperately wanted to tell him something to ease the pain, but he had nothing to give. Nothing else was said between the men. Iathargo waited until Tong collected himself. the cold of the tundra sublimating any remaining water from Tong's eyes. Iatharg opened a portal to the great hall and waited as Tong walked over to him. Iathargo placed a hand on Tong's shoulder as the portal moved to collect the men. They disappeared into the portal, it snapping shut behind them with a small, popping noise. The path to exile. Tong found himself listening.
Yay. That was the end of chapter 2, baby. Your voice is perfect for storytelling. This is so nice and cozy. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Like, whenever I do something like this, I'm always skeptical of the quality of how it turns out, because to me, I've heard it so many times. You know, it's my own voice. It's my own recording. I've edited through it. So I've heard it too much to tell myself if it's like, is this good? Like, I don't know anymore. So I'm really glad you guys like it. Super happy. And make sure to check it out. If you want to get it, it's on Audible. You can also get the original book on Amazon. There are a couple of links in the chat. And it's super nice. I am going to see if I can show more of the chapters on stream. But that's not really up to me. I only said that I would do some marketing and show the first couple of chapters. Because I wanted to. Because it's nice. And I want to show off what I did. So we'll see.